Good evening. Galatians chapter 6, verse 8 says, "For he who sows to his flesh will the flesh reap corruption, but he who sows to the Spirit will the Spirit reap everlasting life." Now I know that Jeff talked about spiritual maturity in his lesson this morning, but I kind of had a topic along the same lines, and so it's kind of late in the day to think of something new, so you may hear another talk here about spiritual maturity, a little different lines of what Jeff had. My topic is what I call spiritual health or spiritual well-being. And we read in Proverbs chapter 20, verse 27, that the spirit of a man is the lamp of the Lord, searching all the inner depths of his heart. This is a pretty sobering verse to me, and when I read this, it grabs my attention, and I can't help but think, what does God see when he is searching the inner depths of my heart? And when I think about my spiritual health or my own spiritual well-being, I think about how much it and my physical health have in common. I know a lot of times when I'm working and trying to get as many things during the day done as I possibly can, it's easy to neglect my physical body, and by maybe eating unhealthy or maybe not working out, not staying as physically active as I'd like to. The same is true with our spiritual body. We have to put in the effort to make sure we are tending to our spiritual needs by studying and by taking every chance we get to make sure we are not going backwards in our spiritual lives. And one comparison that I came up with, and actually kind of the reason why I thought of this topic, is I eat a lot of junk food. Now you may not believe that, but I like pies, brownies, cakes, ice cream, all of it. And if you know my family's house, there's no shortage of any of that. Not that that's a bad thing. Thank you, Mom. But, one thing I've realized about eating a lot of sweets and a lot of things that I probably shouldn't eat near as much of is that it's only good while I'm eating it. Usually when I stack a brownie and a bunch of ice cream into a bowl, it's going over the top of it, and I'll go through the whole thing because I'm not a quitter. I think as I'm eating that last bite, why did I just do that? In the long run, it doesn't do anything good for me. I don't have anything to gain physically by eating an entire pie or a half gallon of ice cream. But, the same can be said about sin. It's only fun while it lasts. And when you catch yourself maybe messing up, or you look back on something that maybe you did or something you said, and you kind of think to yourself, that's not really going to help me grow spiritually, or it's not going to help me as a Christian. And maybe it's the case that a scenario I know that Jeff talked about this morning in his lesson, that maybe we don't even have the spiritual mindset to even notice we did something wrong in the first place. So this evening I'm going to look at a few passages that stress the importance of having a strong spiritual mindset, and from these verses that show the seriousness of having a godly state of mind at all times. Not just at worship. We have to have our minds focused at all times, or else I know that it's easy to think about the physical things around us. And so again, from these verses, hopefully we'll see the mindset that God expects from his people. And the first passage I'm going to look at comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 2, and I'm going to read verses 4 through 16. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, beginning in verse 4 through 16. "In my speech, in my preaching, were not with persuasive words of human wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of the power, that your faith should not be in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. However, we speak wisdom among those who are mature, yet not the wisdom of this age, nor of the rulers of this age, who are coming to nothing. But we speak to the wisdom of God in a mystery, the hidden wisdom which God ordained before the ages of our glory." I'm going to pause here for a second. And I know, just reading from these passages here, we see that there's a difference between godly wisdom and the wisdom that comes from man. And if nothing else, that's very important to take away from right here. But beginning again in verse 8. "Which none of the rulers of this age knew, for had they known, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But as it is written, eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor have entered into the heart of man, the things which God has prepared for those who love him. But God has revealed them to us through his Spirit. For the Spirit searches all things, yes, the deep things of God. For what man knows the things of a man, except the spirit of the man which is in him? Even so, no one knows the things of God, except the Spirit of God. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, that we might know the things that have been freely given to us by God. These things we also speak, not in words which man's wisdom teaches, but which the Holy Spirit teaches, comparing spiritual things with spiritual. But the natural man does not receive the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him. Nor can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. But he who is spiritual judges all things, yet he himself is rightly judged by no one. For he who has known the mind of the Lord, that he may instruct him, but we have the mind of Christ. So, as we read through these verses here, we see that God expects us to recognize the difference of spiritual wisdom and the wisdom that strictly comes from man and man's own understanding. And this is important when taking care of our spiritual health. We have to be able to recognize what truly comes from God and not be deceived by ourselves or maybe from someone else's own understanding. And we see here that God tells us his own words, that he tells us here that the Bible isn't full of men's wisdom, and we can read from his Bible here and know exactly what he expects from us, and that is what he expects us to do, is to know his word. The second passage I like to look at comes from Romans chapter 8, and I'm going to read verses 5 through 17. Romans chapter 8, verses 5 through 17. For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, nor indeed can be. So then those who are in the flesh cannot please God. But you are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God dwells in you. Now if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, he is not his. And if Christ is in you, the body is dead because of sin, but the Spirit is life because of righteousness. But if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to you, to your mortal bodies, through his Spirit who dwells in you. Therefore, brethren, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if the Spirit by you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are sons of God. For you did not receive the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you received the Spirit of adoption, by whom we cry out, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, that we may also be glorified together. And we see here again that God is looking for Christians who have a spiritual mindset, not just someone who shows up for worship services every week and lives for themselves the rest of the time during that week. We have to live with a spiritual mindset every day and continue to monitor our own spiritual growth. Thank you.